I once convinced 250 people to sell everything they owned and sail to a country I had invented from nothing. Most of them never came home. And when I finally died, decades later, a government gave me a hero's funeral anyway. Hi, I'm Robert, and today I'm going to tell you about a man who invented an entire country, flag, currency, anthem, and all, and convinced hundreds of people to stake their lives on it. This is Gregor MacGregor, in his own words. In 1812, I sailed for Venezuela, which was fighting for its independence from Spain, and offered my sword to the revolution. I was not entirely honest about my record when I arrived, but it worked. I was commissioned as a colonel and fought alongside men who would become legends of that war. Men like Simon Bolivar himself, whose cousin I married. In 1816, my forces were badly beaten at a place called La Cabrera, and what happened next is the one part of my story nobody has ever needed to exaggerate. I led the survivors on a retreat through 34 days of jungle, fighting a rearguard action nearly the entire way, watching men collapse from exhaustion and fever, and making myself keep the rest of them moving anyway. I brought most of them out alive. Bolivar thanked me personally and gave me the insignia of a liberator. By 30, I was a general of division. I had earned every bit of that rank. I returned to London a genuine general with a genuinely impressive record, and somewhere in the years that followed, I decided that was not enough. So in a smoke-filled coffee house full of men with money and an appetite for the next great opportunity, I introduced myself as the cazique of Poyais, prince of a fertile, thriving nation on the Mosquito Coast of Central America, land I had genuinely traded rum and trinkets for with a local ruler, and then dressed up into something it was never going to be. I unrolled maps of a capital I called St. Joseph, boulevard wider than London's, a cathedral, a functioning government. I designed its flag. I had its national anthem composed and performed. I printed its own currency and put it directly into skeptical hands, and watched skepticism turn again and again into signatures. Investors bought Poyaisian government bonds by the hundreds of thousands of pounds. Every deal I closed in that room felt, to me, like proof the country was real. I'm still not sure whether that is a confession or an excuse. By 1822, ordinary families, doctors, craftsmen, clerks who had saved for a better life, had bought land certificates for a country they had only ever seen described in a guidebook I published under someone else's name. I stood at the London docks and watched roughly 250 of them board the Honduras packet, waving, genuinely hopeful, calling me their benefactor. I want to tell you, I felt nothing but pride in that moment. That would not be true. Even then, some part of me understood exactly what I was sending them toward, and I said nothing, and I watched the ship vanish into the fog anyway. Historians still argue about whether I had convinced myself Poyais was real by that point, or whether I always knew. I have had a long time to think about it, and I still don't have a clean answer. There is no St. Joseph waiting for them on that shoreline. No boulevards, no cathedral, no government, no cleared land ready for harvest. There was empty coast and jungle, and nothing that matched a single page of the book I had written. Within months, malaria and yellow fever and starvation went through the settlement like a scythe. People held onto Paisian banknotes that were worth exactly nothing in a place that had never had a bank, a currency, or a country to back either. Some of them kept expecting rescue ships that weren't coming, kept believing, even as neighbors died around them, that the mistake would surely be corrected. By the time survivors were finally found, close to 2 out of every 3 people who had sailed for Poyais were dead. I was in London the entire time. I did not sail to see any of it happen. When the survivors who did make it home started talking to newspapers, the scandal broke across Britain and France both, and in 1825 I was arrested in Paris on charges of fraud. The prosecutor did not go easy on me. One newspaper called me a butcher of his own countrymen, and I will not pretend I didn't understand why. My defense was two-pronged. First, that the men who had promoted and sold the scheme underneath me bore the real responsibility, not me personally, and second, and I said this with a straight face, that as the sovereign cazique of Poyais, I could hardly be tried by a French court for the internal affairs of my own nation. Absurd as it sounds, it worked well enough. I was acquitted in 1826. I will not pretend I learned any lasting lesson from nearly 200 deaths. I ran smaller versions of the very same Poyais scheme for another decade after that trial, selling land certificates for a country that still did not exist to investors who still, somehow, wanted to believe it did. By 1837, I was older, running out of both money and people willing to be fooled, sitting alone some nights in a London apartment, surrounded by the relics of a career I could no longer quite believe myself. Old maps, an old uniform, a title that had stopped meaning anything to anyone but me. I made one final version of the same gamble I had been making my entire adult life, that I could talk my way into one more chance. This time, London had finally had enough of me. So in 1839, with nothing left to sell in Britain, I did the one thing I actually had left that was real. I appealed to the government of Venezuela, the country I had genuinely fought for as a young man, and asked to be reinstated. They said yes. I sailed back to Caracas and was met, astonishingly, with a parade, crowds who knew me only as the general who had marched 34 days through jungle for their independence, with no idea or no interest in what I had done in the years since. I was restored to the rank of general of division and granted a pension for service decades old. I died in Caracas in 1845, and the Venezuelan government buried me with full military honors and a priest's eulogy as a hero of their revolution. Both of those things are true about the same man, the general who saved his men in the jungle, and the one who sent 250 people to a country that never existed. I have never found a way to make them add up to a single, simple verdict, and I am not sure you will either. That was the story of Gregor MacGregor, in his own words. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more real historical figures narrated in their own voice. And let me know in the comments who you want to see next.